the sessions that follow for the next 2 days. We have Anita Mendiratta, founder and managing director of Cachet Consulting. She's also an author of the book Come Closer. I won't read out her bio, it's on page 17 of the program, but just to say that Anita has for many years been involved in matters of international tourism, and her insights in tourism have been sought by national leaders in her work in the UN World Tourism Organization. She is an optimist and a realist, and she has expressed her views eloquently in her book Come Closer, in which she describes how tourism can shape the future of nations. And it's with great pleasure and an enormous admiration and interest that I ask Anita Mendiratta to take the stage and provide us with the opening key address. And the title is Indigenous and Invaluable. Please welcome Anita to the stage.
Thank you very much. We were given the brief yesterday that we are to make sure that our dialogue over the next 2 days is very informal. So I'm going to break the physical boundary. Also, my heart is fluttering a little bit because with that introduction and following the Honourable Minister, my inner child is feeling a little bit wrong standing at the head of the table alongside you. So, to all of you, Honourable Minister of Tourism, thank you very much for the opening address this morning. John Fitzgerald, the CEO, I can't see you. John Fitzgerald, the CEO of Tourism NT, our local celebrity of tourism for the Pacific Asia region, Ian King, and the chairman of this conference, I beg your pardon, John King. I think I just did some displacement. To all of you here, thank you very much. To the Larrakia people, thank you for welcoming us to your home and allowing us to be here with you for the 2 days. I also want to make a special word of thanks to Ian Kennedy, who has been really a champion in bringing us all here today. To Rebecca Innes, who can only be described as everyone's guardian angel through this process. And we thank you for giving us your time, your energy, and the comfort of your feet for the next 3 days. And to Suzanne Morgan from Tourism NT, who I've had the immense honor of spending the last few days with, going through the territory and getting an appetizer of an induction. As indicated, my name is Anita Mendiratta. I am really, truly honored to be here. All protocols observed. It is wonderful being able to stand with you all. And not only to set the scene for the next 2 days, I want to set your hearts. That really is what, to me, is the most important part of what I do. I want to be able to effectively pull the lens back and look at the global travel and tourism industry from the point of view of not what we do, but why we do it and how we do it. Because ultimately, our world is reshaping. We see that an event taking place at one part of the world is having a significant impact at the other. People are paying attention to budget speeches taking place in Australia right now. They want to know what the impact is going to be in the UK, in Japan, in the United States. As a result of what's been happening economically, politically, socially in the last 3 years, we have erased international borders. There are no borders anymore, and much of that is because of travel and tourism. We are seeing that people are moving much faster, much wider, and much more courageously than in any other time that has come. This year, and possibly the third quarter, we are going to reach 1 billion international tourists crossing borders. I always argue that it's 1 billion tourists, as Manfred knows when he tried to make his way here from Ayers Rock. It's not necessarily 1 billion pieces of luggage. That tends to arrive a little bit later than we hoped. But 1 billion people are crossing international borders this year. That equates to 1 in 7 people worldwide. 1 in 7 people are grabbing their passports, grabbing their cameras, and grabbing their hopes and taking them somewhere new. Why are we doing this? We are doing this because this is where we want to find our hearts. As much as we have the technology, as much as we have our cell phones and our sexy iPads, until they can develop a hug app and a hug attachment, there is nothing like coming together. There is nothing like being together. People are finding, particularly because of the events of the last decade, they want to make that trek to Thanksgiving. They want to spend Christmas together, New Year's together. February 14th is becoming more important to the tourism industry because people want to tell each other that they love each other. They don't want to send an email or a text. We're also finding that as the world explores new opportunity, the West is needing to travel east to develop those relationships that cannot be developed through teleconferencing, and the East is wanting to travel west. We are in a remarkable period of time that is very much grounded in the principle of because I can. And fashionability and tourism have become one. It is a statement for a company to set up offices in Shanghai. It is a statement for a young girl from Shanghai to travel all the way across to London, to stand in the line at Harrods and buy her Louis Vuitton, even though she could go across to Hong Kong and do exactly the same thing. Travel and tourism has become a badge, and it's become a badge of honor for many. It's also become the living Wikipedia and the living Google. People travel because they want to understand what's happening. One of the most fascinating things I find, and I've been very blessed to work with the UNWTO this past year in the MENA recovery, the region, the Middle East, North Africa region recovery. The most popular tourism destination in Cairo today is Tahrir Square, because people want to know where it happened. They want to see where the region started to change and where the Arab Spring had its first little shoots. I remember distinctly back in May last year, we had the pleasure of going on a mission with the UN to visit the then Prime Minister. And we were driving through Tahrir Square afterwards, and I was with a gentleman that, Honourable Minister, you probably know quite well, Talib Rifai, who's the Secretary General. And we're sitting in his car, and we're, of course, driving through Tahrir Square, because we had to get to our hotel, and my eyes are getting wider. And he's just watching me twitch, because my tail couldn't sit still in the back of the chair. And I looked at the side wall, and in Arabic and in English was sprayed in spray paint, "Enjoy your revolution." And there was this feeling of, oh my word, I'm here. It's that same feeling I felt on Sunday morning when I landed into Sydney, with a feeling of, oh my heavens, I'm here. We must never lose that feeling of awe, even though our industry is travel and tourism. We are blessed to be doing this. This past 2 days, when I was with Suzanne and Ayers Rock, I couldn't help but think, how many people plan for 6 to 12 months, save for 6 to 12 months to do what I did in a day like that? Why? Because of the kindness of Tourism NT, Ian, Rebecca, Suzanne. That was made possible. My fundamental belief, the day that we lose that awe of travel, we must hand in our passports, because we lose the whole magic behind what we are doing. Why does it matter? Why does travel and tourism really matter? Very importantly, it's not about the beaches and the bikinis. The tourists matter. Absolutely, we need them, and God bless them. But it's not just about the beaches and the bikinis. And forgive me, this is not my language. This is someone else's. It's the economy. It's all about the economy. The travel and tourism sector is the third biggest sector worldwide behind automotive and banking, and it's the only of the three sectors that did not receive a bailout during the Great Recession. It is the third largest sector that actually gets less attention than probably the others in the top 10. It generates $6 trillion in revenues every single year. It is responsible for 1 in 12 jobs directly around the world. 1 in 12 people are able to go home with not just money in their pockets and a sense of having done something. They're able to feed their families. They're able to keep the lights on. They're able to pay for education. They are able to build a quality of life because of what you do every single day. In the Asia-Pacific region itself, 63 million people are employed directly by our industry. Globally, it's 5% of global GDP. Every year, every minute, every second in the States, I found this fascinating, and this is a little bit old data, but it gives some context. In 2010, every single second, $24,000 was generated in spending by domestic and international tourists in the States. In the States alone, $24,000 a second. And the time it's taken me to explain that, that's more than $250,000 that's been generated. like that because of our industry. Here again in Pacific Asia, it's $553.7 billion US dollars that's generated. One of the great things about travel and tourism is that it inspires investment. It inspires foreign direct investment, local divestment, it inspires building. The beauty is that infrastructure that is required for travel and tourism is not just for the tourists. Travel and tourism renews airports, it builds road systems, it upgrades telecommunications. All of that is for everyone to make use of. It ultimately is a way of channeling money into the development of infrastructure. Here again in Pacific Asia, at present it's $253 billion worth of money that is channeled towards travel and tourism investment. 10% of exports worldwide, 30% of services. 30% of services come through our industry. One of the best things about our industry as well that really is quite unique is stakeholder alignment. For all of you that work in the public sector of the tourism industry and equally on the private sector, one of the most challenging parts of our job is aligning stakeholders. And exactly as John knows right now through going through the process, it is effectively the lifeblood of keeping our industry alive. But no other industry basically encourages, inspires, and requires that transport, construction, telecommunications, banking, home affairs, inland security all work together as one. That's quite remarkable because in many ways, travel and tourism is the only industry in which every single national has a role to play. Because whether you're in the industry or not and your business card has tourism written on it, every single Australian, every single person from the Pacific Asia region is a host. As a result, they are playing a part in the travel and tourism industry. That creates national competitiveness, which on the global stage is one of the most powerful forces that every country needs. Humility serves no country right now. We need to compete, but we need to compete smartly. Many destinations have found that it is through travel and tourism. What I find is one of the most beautiful powers of travel and tourism is the fact that it generates local pride. It makes nationals proud of their home. When they are proud of their home, they are not only kinder to people who come to visit, but people don't like graffitiing their home. They don't like breaking the windows of their home. They don't litter in their own home. So through travel and tourism, we actually housekeep our nation as a whole. We take care of where we live as one national community. That national pride should never, ever be underestimated for the tangible impact that it has at a social level and economic level. And ultimately, it is the greatest form of global diplomacy. There is no better way for me to understand Australia, regardless of how much I want to Google it and Wikipedia and do the research. I learn more about Australia and about the Aboriginal communities by spending time in the territory, by learning directly, not just who these people are on the left side of the brain. Who are they in the heart? What do they stand for? What do they mean? There is nothing that can transcend that in terms of making an impact of nations getting to know one another. This is why we say that travel and tourism is a vehicle of peace. You cannot say that up front, because people will just think there's too much incense burning in my flat. We have to now focus on the fundamentals. But ultimately, when you create that global understanding, that is how you make global connection. That is how you develop peace. I'm a finicky one when it comes to language, and this conversation started yesterday actually in the speaker's briefing. But one word that I get very allergic to when we talk, particularly in a political context, is the word tolerance. Tolerance has its limitations. Reason being that, sorry, Suzanne, I'm going to use you as my guinea pig. I might learn about Suzanne and her differences, and I might tolerate her differences. Tolerating simply means I have a thought bubble over my head that I'm not quite prepared to share with Suzanne. Tolerate means I will spend time with you, but I'm not quite sure I want to invite you for dinner after we've done all of our touring. It's not about tolerance. It's about understanding. When you have that understanding, you make that connection. It is through travel and tourism that we are able to make that connection. So what we know. We know that ultimately the travel and tourism industry should never, ever, ever be underestimated for what it can do, for all of the reasons that I've just shared. And Hannah Mercerli is a very dear colleague from the World Bank who focuses primarily on Africa, but she is a global champion and literally will staunchly stand behind the industry, because often all of the efforts that you make are not given the credit they deserve. It's not seen and understood why the Honourable Minister's address and all the achievements need to be so appreciated for being a fundamental building block of the future of Australia at all levels across the globe, especially when it comes to nations that are building. And when I started using this image and this angle, it was nations that were rebuilding, like Montenegro coming out of the war, Croatia, Azerbaijan, a new country that effectively was born with the end of the Cold War. But if you look at countries around the world right now that are paralyzed because of economic crisis, that are broken because of natural disaster, there is no country around the world that is not dealing with some sort of crisis. Tourism is one of those industries that allows us to strengthen our muscle, strengthen our spirit, and strengthen our resolve. We talk about the multiplier effect. It's language that we all use, but I just wanted to give a little bit of a breakdown of what exactly this means at a personal level. We know the travelers arrive, they come, they spend, they create that economic activity. In doing that, they're creating jobs. In doing that, they're creating opportunity. They're stimulating trade, they're inspiring investment. That's usually where we stop the conversation. That's usually where we talk about the joys of travel and tourism. Oops, and there we go. What we often forget is that to create jobs, to create opportunity, to inspire investment, in so doing, we're actually building skills. We're building worth. We're building homes. We're feeding families. We're generating communities. We're building infrastructure, and we're growing our competitiveness. All of that creates the virtuous circle. So it's not just about the multiplier effect, it's the virtuous circle. Because the stronger we are as a destination, the stronger we are as a nation. The stronger our destination, the stronger our invitation. That brings in more tourists. Those more tourists re-stimulate that whole multiplier effect to allow for additional growth. And that's where, when we look at the effort that is being made in Pacific Asia around Indigenous tourism, that is why we can see the ripple effect is profound. The impact is profound. And that is what we talk about sustainable tourism. That is why tourism is able to genuinely engineer itself in a way that goes far beyond the value of the industry and touches the value of people's lives. Tourism is an incredibly powerful force of progress. What we often forget, however, and what we really need to hold close to our hearts to recognize that what you do every day has a remarkable impact on everything that we care for. Tourism is one of the only industries in which we can actively make an effort to take care of what we care for. We always talk about the environment. It's become the top area in terms of sustainability and the value of tourism. However, we forget the impact that travel and tourism has on communities. Dr. Rifai from the UNWTO often speaks about not just the value of travel and tourism from a trade, investment, arrivals, revenues, yield perspective. It allows people to stay at home. It allows communities to stay together because they are generating revenue in their place of home rather than having to leave for the big city to make money. That's huge in terms of the fiber of a destination and the fiber of a nation, because at that level, you can't separate the two. Every single national is a thread in the national flag. Every single person has a role to play, and we need to make sure that those threads are strong. Through travel and tourism, we protect culture. We take care of folklore. We take care of traditions. And what's great is when traditions become sexy and they become ultimately something that we want to naturally weave in. We take care of wildlife. We forget the fact that it is because people are wanting to come and see who else lives with us, these little creatures that we need to be able to see. I had a little sound bite in that coming through to the Rock. I've been to Australia many times, I've been to the region many times, but I'd never been to the Northern Territory. And, of course, it drove Suzanne nuts because the first thing I said to her, we're going to Ayers Rock, we're going to Uluru, we're going to see the communities, we're going to see it all. And I just said to her, I really want to see a kangaroo. And she looked at me with this, oh, dear God, how am I going to do this? We're not going to see one. So she started negotiating the little rock creatures that look like little kangaroos. So if we think about it and you put a zoom lens on, it'll be fine. We're looking around, nothing. The entire drive from Ayers Rock to Alice Springs, nothing, not even a horny devil. Horny devil? Thorny devil. Oh, that was... You never know. There's a reason why they're standing at the side of the road. Anyway, we didn't even see that. That we can edit out very quickly. And so yesterday we must have been 10 minutes in Alice Springs to look around, and I was getting a lovely little tour. We went to the telegraph center. We went to the watering hole. Nothing. I think we saw 2 birds. There was nothing with a long tail, nothing with little ears, and nothing that would get me excited. As we're driving out of the telegraph center towards the main road, must have been 100 meters, Suzanne became a travel god. And this little lad runs across the road. It was almost as if on her car she hit GPS, enter stage right, kangaroo. And I'm even now, I've had to negotiate down to, okay, I'll get a wallaby. I'll accept a wallaby. This kangaroo goes across the road. I grabbed for my camera. You couldn't keep her in the seat of the car because she was just feeling so grand. But it was amazing that for everything I knew I was going to see, there was something I needed to see to know that I was here. And as stereotypical as it is, sadly, that's why people come. They come for the icons and the stereotypes. They leave with the stories. As much as I saw this little lad and he escaped, that's now our story. And that's something really special because it brings a sense of place. But the wildlife is critical. I would have loved my trip, but it's that much more enhanced by seeing that little kangaroo and those little horny devils at the side of the road. What we also can't forget is that the tourism industry does have a very soft underbelly. There are reasons why people travel that we often feel very ashamed of. Tourism is an incredible force for protecting children. There is a conscious effort across the tourism industry worldwide to make sure that when you come to our country, you keep your hands off our kids. And it's a very important question that Dr. de Villiers, who was the former Secretary General of the UNWTO, equally importantly, he was the former Minister of Tourism of South Africa. But what is most important to South Africans, he's the former coach of the Springboks. And he asked the question, he's the head of the Ethics Commission, he asked the question, does tourism have a right to grow? Do we, for all of the impact that we have on people, on environments, on wildlife, on children, do we have a right to grow? Yes, as long as we ensure that we are the guardians of that growth. But the children is an important part of the impact that we have. Ultimately, at its essence, tourism is conscience in action. It's conscience not just in terms of what we do to grow the tourism industry, but it's what tourists do to stimulate that growth, especially when we actively take hold of that responsibility. A gentleman named Sajid Banerjee was the former Secretary of Tourism of India during the whole time of Incredible India, and he's actually now been put on the International Board for UNESCO because of his fundamental belief in the value of tourism beyond the arrival numbers. And I asked him, I said, please, I'm coming to this conference. It's incredibly important. I know that he has a great belief in this. I said, please, may I share your wisdom with the world? And I love what he came back with. And him basically saying that not only do we just stimulate economic impact, I loved his point about intercultural dialogue. Tourism inspires people to share their stories. In so doing, they create that conversation, especially when it comes to weaving together people, not just on where they are and their history and their culture, but their values, their common values. That's incredibly important. And we find, particularly when it comes to Indigenous tourism, that's where that values becomes a common platform. Yet, we cannot be naive to the risks. We know that, especially when it comes to Indigenous people. And I wanted to pull back a little bit and not just focus on this country and this region, but let's look at it across the world. There are 370 million people that are classified as Indigenous around the world. They are 5% of the world's population, more than 5,000 different groups. They live in more than 70 countries. They occupy 20% of the world's territory. And importantly, they're not always the minority. They're not always a small segment of society. In many cases, they are equal to or more than 50%. They speak approximately 4,000 languages, and they are the guardians. They are the genuine guardians of our history, our culture, our traditions, and our ecosystems. These people are the heartbeats of destinations. And when we think of Indigenous tourism communities, and we pull back and think, which are the ones we know most? It was fascinating, the numbers that came through. As an example, we all know of our neighbors, which is a fantastic part of the Pacific Asia region itself. We have the American Indians, the Karen from Thailand, the Amazon Nation, the people from Peru and in PNG, the indigenous communities of Mongolia. We have the people in Rajasthan and northern India, the Bushmen from the southern African region, the Khoisan and all the people that are involved there, the Maasai. We have the Mayans, we have the Bedouin, we have the Zulu, and we have the Aboriginals. So when we look at who are the indigenous people, these are the faces that we need to remember. And especially, these are the children that we need to protect. We need to protect who they are as people, the places they come from, and what they fundamentally believe in. However, they are 15% of the world's poor. And as we know, their life expectancy is on average around the world 20 years less than other nationals. Why is that? It's simply this. It's a loss of identity, a loss of inclusivity, and a loss of opportunity. Their impact on the destination, as a result, is a loss of authenticity. And this is really the nub of the issue. When we look at what is the importance of the Indigenous community to tourism, from a tourism perspective, it's all about authenticity. Anyone who has wanted to plan a trip to Africa goes for open skies, the bush, they want to go on safari, they want to see wildlife in their natural habitat. There is nothing more heartbreaking than to see a German tourist put their camera down as soon as they approach a kill. Why? Because that poor element of wildlife is surrounded by 8 other 4x4s. We've lost the authenticity. What does that translate to in terms of travel experiences? We've broken our promise. The promise that we make that we will give people that dream that they are seeking and they are paying their time and money for. And yet, authenticity is vital to our destination. Without our Indigenous people, we lose the authenticity that we are actually trying to bring people to see and to protect because it allows us to compete. Travelers want to touch what is real. They want to feel what is real, and they want to make a genuine connection. We can't lose that. And importantly, we can't fabricate that. The people of our nation are not attractions. They are part of the fiber of who we are, and we need to ensure that we allow that connection to stay genuine. Authenticity goes far beyond the what. It's not about the product. It's actually the how. It's the how we do things. Whatever we do in tourism, it needs to be authentic, not because it ticks a box, but because it's in the DNA of not only what we offer, but why people are coming in the first place. All involved ultimately must be proud of what they are creating. All involved, not just the people who are in the tourism industry as creators, but the participants and the travelers themselves, because there must be a sense of worth. It all comes down to worth. The W in worth, a willingness. It's not just a willingness of the destination and the Honourable Minister and all of his team that want to go and create Australia as a competitive destination and push past that 5 million mark. There must be a willingness of the Indigenous communities to also participate. That is critical. It has to be in partnership. There must be a genuine desire to make this work because we know why it works. As a result, there must be ownership. And it's not just ownership in terms of the business and the SME development, it's the ownership in terms of the contribution that is being made to tourism. There must be revenue. Obviously, there must be a sustainable revenue model underneath it. There must be transfer. But the important thing is it's not just transfer of knowledge, it's transfer of respect, it's transfer of understanding. And that transparency 2 ways. It's not just about the Maasai teaching the locals, the tourists, what it means to live in Kenya as a local bushman. It's not about that. It's also about the tourist teaching the Maasai why they wanted to learn, what it's like to travel, what Germany is like on the other side of the border. That's really important. That transfer is critical because that's where you make the connection. That's when it becomes real. And it must be holistic. The role that tourism needs to play within Indigenous communities is not just about something. It's about a greater role in building a quality of life. That holism allows it to stay genuine, allows it to stay sustainable, and allows us to have a sense of pride in that. We cannot ignore that 1 billion is a serious responsibility. As much as we're all very excited that someone's going to get off the plane and get the fright of their life because all these balloons are going to pop, that they're the 1 billionth traveler, we need to take that responsibility seriously. Because if we are encouraging 1 billion plus people around the world to travel the world, we need to make sure they understand the impact. Excuse me, I have a huge bee in my bonnet now, having been out to Uluru and seeing it, and the rock is magnificent. It is magnetic, it's quite profound when you see it, and you can't take your eyes off it. But even more so, I think what struck me the most was that through the storytelling, through the communication, through the guides, and through the signage, there was a request. Please, please, please do not climb the rock. And there's an explanation why. We explain why, we explain the significance, we explain the role of sensitivity. Please, please, we ask you not to climb the rock. We don't say, don't climb the rock. We ask you, for these reasons of understanding and culture and history and pride, do not climb the rock. And yet you look up, and people are climbing the rock. And one of the greatest sadnesses is that with tourism, incorrectly comes a feeling that there's entitlement. Just because you are invited into someone's home does not mean you can walk in the door and leave your shoes on. We need to remember the responsibility that we in the industry have of teaching travelers that not only can you experience culture shock, you can impose culture shock. That's a really important part of keeping our industry alive, not just from a numbers perspective, but from a value perspective, and making sure that we are seen to be making a positive impact. With that, there are 5 questions we need to ask ourselves. Just 5 simple questions. I took this brief very seriously when I was kindly contacted by Ian and John in a sense of what does this mean? Because particularly being a Canadian who's now become a nomad, and I've been living in South Africa since 1995, which was right after the abolishment of apartheid. Because technically, because I have Indian descent, I would not have been able to have gotten a job, even with Unilever, with whom I transferred, in South Africa because I was Indian. And it was amazing to see on my employment paperwork asking what tribe I come from. And you just think it's incredible how our world has changed. What's important about these 2 days, it's not about finding the answers to the questions. It's about making sure that we're constantly asking ourselves the questions. And that's why I want to leave you with these 5 questions we need to ask ourselves. Firstly, in Indigenous tourism, in whatever we decide to do, are we building skills? Are we building skills that are genuinely transferable, that allow people to continue to not just make money, but to create a sense of worth? Are we building pride and dignity? This, to me, is the most important question that we all need to ask. In what we are doing, in asking those Karen people to open their homes so they can show people the incredible length and beauty of their necks with the gold rings, is there any dignity of someone coming and pointing at the number of rings and counting them? Again, our communities are not attractions. These are people. It is not they, it is us. We are all one under the same flag. So for whatever we are doing, are we building pride and dignity? And that all of that is going to go directly to that sense of worth. Thirdly, are we obviously building a sustainable model for economic activity? Do we have that constant flow of revenue generation? Not just long-term in terms of the benefits, but right through the year. Do we have a 365 model of year-round ability to create economic activity? Fourth, are we building two-way understanding? And this I touched on earlier. And lastly, are we building for the next generation? Are we genuinely preserving what the Indigenous communities, what our people value, so that that value can be passed on? There is so much that risks being lost by the generation of technology, the generation of celebutants, and the generation of global society. We need to put the value on keeping the heritage, the culture, the traditions, the folklore, the spirit, and the ancestors alive. We need to make sure that that's protected for the next generation. It is our responsibility to build worth as we build tourism. Every single one of us has a direct responsibility. And I don't mean simply investing in it, creating something from it. The words that you use create worth. The actions that you take on a daily basis create worth. Everyone has the ability of building the industry and building worth without even putting a penny in. It starts fundamentally with our words. Make that 1 billion count, and make it count by recognizing the power of one. Each of you are not only business people, leaders, ultimately champions of the industry, you are voices of what we need to ultimately make sure we are still proud of as we hit 2 billion, as we hit 3 billion. Make that 1 billion count. And with that, I say God bless. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. Well done, Anita. That was brilliant, and it's very inspiring. Thank you so much for your opening address. I got so much out of it, bringing the heart back into tourism, and I like the message that Indigenous people and the Indigenous supporters, we are the heartbeat. And Anita's agreed to take some questions. We have microphones in the aisles. I can't see them, but there's one there. Who would like to open the floor with some questions to Anita? Sorry, I can't see with the light. Thanks, Rebecca.
Yes, my name's Wes Miller, and I'm the chairman of a Indigenous tourism company at Nibmaluk, which is near Catherine, just south of Darwin. I've got possibly two questions. One, you did mention early in your speech about the use of Google and Wikipedia. Now, the thought crossed my mind, do you think having that access to that information, which we never had even, let's say, 20 years or even before that, do you think that has been an enhancer of travel, or do you think, people can go on Google and Wikipedia so that maybe they don't need to travel? Do you think that sort of inspires people? Do you think the technology that we have now is also something that's built up the travel tourism industry?
Indeed. That's a great question, and thank you for that. I think what's interesting is that technology has actually fed the desire to travel at many levels. Firstly, it builds information, so it provides the ability to learn more. So if anything, it allows people to go from a zoom lens on a country to, an aerial to a zoom lens, and that's really important. So it allows them to learn about specific places, but also to learn the backstory of specific places. What's also been really interesting about technology, particularly in the last 3 years, is that because people have been grounded because of the economic impact of the global crisis, and they were told that they're not able to go on holiday because of the fact that they might not have a job, people have used tourism websites as a vehicle for voyeurism. And they've allowed the websites to feed their desire to travel. I always use the example, and forgive me because usually only the women in the room understand this, and that when you're told you have to go on a diet, and you know you can't, it's end of the year, January 1st, you're going to go on a diet because you've eaten too much over the holidays. As soon as, the first few days are fine, But as soon as you start getting a little bit growly because your mood's gone off, because you're not getting the sugar that you need, you start planning on what you're going to eat the day the diet breaks. And it's the same with the economic crisis. When people were told you cannot travel because of what's happening globally in terms of what's happening around the world, they started extending, and a lot of the people that are experts in particularly not just social media but online travel know that the search period pulled back more. The booking period shut down, closed quite a bit, but the upfront inquiry expanded a great deal because that anticipation was fed through the vehicle of technology to be able to increase that desire so that when they could travel, this is what they were going to do, this is where they were going to go, and this is how they were going to enjoy it. We've now brought in through technology the whole bragging component. So people are sharing through technology their experiences, not just when they get back and they load their photographs, they're sharing it while they're in the moment as well. So technology has allowed us to showcase the travel and tourism world far better than ever before, because it's not just about the holiday, it's the pre and the post as well. So it's the anticipation, it's the being there, and then it's the afterglow, which ultimately is now the bragging. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it's good. Just had one other question. My observations, in Australia at least, with Indigenous tourism, that the transfer of wealth, or how else you might call it, has not transferred to the people who are part of that. So you have a really great tourism product, and you were saying that there's trillions of dollars are coming out of tourism. I think one of the great challenges is to try and transfer that onto the Indigenous people who are involved and whose country is involved. I don't see that yet, and I think that, to me, is one of the great challenges, and particularly, as you said, going on to the next generation.
Indeed, and that's really where it comes down to the integrity of what we do. It's one of the greatest challenges of making sure that the earnings, that the revenue spent in tourism does indeed get funneled back to the communities, to the people, to the actual artisans, for instance. And that's where it becomes a great challenge of the policymakers, like the Honourable Minister, to ensure that we're not just doing things right, but we're doing the right thing. And for some, it's a very uncomfortable shift, but it's important. And that's where the likes of scorecards come to play. In South Africa, for instance, we had BE scorecards. And for a lot of the tourism industry, they were told, unless you fulfill these requirements, you're not getting the tender. Simple. And people understood that because it's uncomfortable to make those profound shifts, but we know that it's the right thing to do. And therefore, everyone must raise the bar. And then what I see in terms of the next stage, because I've been asked in a couple of media interviews, particularly about Australia, you in many ways are ahead of the curve because you are genuinely weaving Indigenous tourism and Indigenous communities into the economic engineering and the societal connectivity of the nation as a whole. There are many countries that ultimately have Indigenous communities that are the core reason why people travel. That's not the case here. So the fact that Australia as a community has said, this is something that is important to us and we are going to do it because we want to, not because we have to, that's full credit. But it's an important road that everyone must travel together. Any other questions?
Okay, one more question over there.
Yeah, my name's James Golden Brown. I'm CEO of a Native Title Land Council in Western Victoria, and we are in the process of establishing our tourism enterprises. What would you see as one of our critical blockers is that, and no disrespect to brothers and sisters from the territory, is that blackfellas only live in the top end or Central Australia, North Queensland, where we've got a rich, vast cultural experience in Western Victoria. We've got deserts, we've got rock art, we've got the Grampians, we've got waterways. So how would you go about dispelling those myths on a domestic scale and on a world scale?
I'm going to make a guess, at exactly what you said because there's quite a reverberation. Apologies. But what I'm hearing you saying is that for all of the product that is created, how do you get it out into wider markets? Is that correct?
And dispelling the myths that blackfellas only live in the territory in Central Australia, Northern Western Australia and top end of Queensland. Because I just came back from overseas last week and all they ask about, the market over there, all they know about is Uluru, Kakadu, the Kimberleys.
What we found is really important, and it happens at a global level, is that to be able to sell the message beyond simply the icons, so getting people to go beyond those primary points, is creating effectively the tourism routes that connect one place to the other. One thing I found is, and I was very pleased that we didn't fly from Ayers Rock to Alice, because that 4-hour journey, a 5-hour journey with all those little lads on the side of the road, was a really important way of feeling the space and seeing the places. We need to be the ones encouraging people to take the time to be able to look and explore more and to use the icons and those main attractions as start points and refueling points, but appreciating the wider perimeter. And this is where it goes back to, again, the Honourable Minister and to John from Tourism NT, to make sure that when it comes to development of tourism product, it's getting out of that 100-kilometre radius and pushing beyond that. That's where, again, there are specific roles that government has to play, that the private sector has to play, that NGOs have to play, that the media has to play. There are certain things that the public sector should not be doing. There are certain things that the private sector should not be doing. What's always critical in terms of being able to develop tourism in a way that goes beyond the icons and the attractions is making sure that people are doing what they're supposed to. And so that's where, when it comes to the strategies that are developed for the territory, for the states, for the nation, for the region, those strategies are the start points to where the investment will be fed for development. And that's why the consultative processes that the NT is going through right now is so critical, to make sure that people like yourself have a chance to exercise your voice within the strategy development so that ultimately everyone can make it work together. And your question is critical, and that's where I can't help but thinking what John is going through now with the consultative process, and you've shown why that dialogue is vital. Because otherwise there will not be awareness of the importance of getting off the traditional route, going into those other areas, and then utilizing the national and the international marketing platforms to make sure that people hear of it. A critical part of tourism development is SME development and SMMEs, as we have in South Africa as well with the micros. Every enterprise, every developer needs a champion. They need someone there to not just clear the path and find opportunities, but to magnify your effort. That's why you need to work so closely with your government partners to make sure that what you are doing is fed into what they are doing for everyone's benefit. Does that answer?
Yeah, it does.
Great.
Thank you very much for the question, and I apologise for walking through your question and reverberating on the stage, but I was going to grab a gift to give to our speaker as a memento of her fantastic introduction to today, and please join in the applause to thank her as I give it to her. Thank you, and we're about to go into a networking break, and it's a networking break as an opportunity for you to ask questions, possibly of Anita and other speakers, and also of each other, and we'll take a break now and be back at 10:15. Thank you very much.